Welcome back to the FF Forge. It is time to wrap up Rankings Day with the wide receiver position. I think there's quite a few to talk about, so I did announcements about things. My rankings up on the website, www.theffforge. Those will be put up on Thursday. You can find them. They get updated throughout the week, and they will definitely be different than the wide receiver rankings here, as I will have done my projections throughout all of today on Wednesday, and that's going to change my rankings here more significantly than it does for the quarterbacks and the tight ends. Plus, I already did my projections for the quarterbacks and tight ends before those videos, so those helped shape those positions anyways. But in the instance of the wide receivers and previously the running backs, I just take the ECR from up on Fantasy Pros website. I take the top X amount of players in the wide receivers case, the top 60, and I go with that. And I start shifting them around, and sometimes my projections or myself just really don't agree with where the ECR is, and sometimes the ECR is off because some players they're questionable, and some people think that they're going to play, others don't think that they're going to play, and that can mess with their rankings too. So it's not a perfect thing here, but the main idea is that I will get to talk about some of the players who I have the biggest current differences with, and I try to make sure that they're the accurate big differences, just because I think a guy's going to start and most people don't think they're going to start. That's a little bit of a different scenario that I don't need to explain myself. But in the event of someone like DeAndre Hopkins, who I have 5 spots behind the ECR, it's a fairly significant difference, then I need to explain that a little bit and say what's concerning me about him, why am I dropping him down in my rankings. Now, let's just get started here explaining this chart. These are my rankings over here, and I do them in tiers, so you will see a color change, and it's the big color changes that matter. These little softer, similar colors are going to be sort of sub-tiers where my confidence may change within a tier. I found the tiers for the wide receivers fairly easy to make, as the things get kind of ugly fairly quickly and muddled. So I do have some larger tiers. As I've been doing the tiers, the elite players I just lump in with the first tier, as we all kind of know those elite guys that you're not going to be messing with. And I just noticed that you may not have been able to see this example as I was talking about it, my bad, but here it is. And we'll get to that in just a moment. Over here is the difficulty rating. A deeper, darker red is going to be a better matchup this week for those players. White, neutral, blue, bad. Then here is the ECR, and here is the difference. If it's a negative number, that means that I am lower on those guys than the ECR. So you can just look at some of those bigger numbers and see where I'm different with, if you wish. Now let's get to the wide receiver rankings, and with my first tier starting off at wide receiver number 1, I have Justin Jefferson, followed by Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs, and here is a little bit of a mid-tier shift in confidence, moving on down to T. Higgins at wide receiver 8, followed by Jalen Waddle, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, CeeDee Lamb, Keenan Allen, Christian Kirk, DeAndre Hopkins, Garrett Wilson, Amari Cooper, and Devonta Smith to wrap up my first tier, which is quite a big tier this week, but I feel pretty confident given the options after this area of the field of options this week that I'm pretty much trying to get these guys, I shouldn't say trying to, I'm confident with these guys compared to some of the other options this week. So once again, there is the top 10 there if you want to take another quick sneak peek before we move on down to DeAndre Hopkins, the first guy I have to talk about, who I have 5 spots behind the ECRs. I went over 15, ECR items 10, going up against New England. I am concerned about the Arizona offense this week going up against New England. It's that simple. Also for DeAndre Hopkins, we will see later, Rondale Moore is being ranked, so I guess he may be returning. Between him, Marquise Brown, and DeAndre Hopkins, then we have the full onset of weapons, which is great for the Arizona offense. That could definitely help him overcome a tough matchup like this. But we don't really know what that looks like, so there's concern about concentration of targets, which really helps DeAndre Hopkins. But we know that he is a target that Kyler likes, so not that concerned about that situation, but in this game, I am a little bit concerned about that. Now let's move on to the next tier of wide receivers, starting off at wide receiver 19 with Chris Godwin, followed by Deebo Samuel, Gabe Davis, DJ Moore, Adam Thielen, Mike Evans, Marquise Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, Jerry Jeudy, Joshua Palmer, Brandon Ayuk, Zay Jones, Deontay Johnson, Michael Gallup, and Donovan Peoples-Jones in at wide receiver 33. And as you can see, I am painting these tiers with a fairly broad brush this week because that's how I feel about these players. I have lots of questions or confidence in them, and obviously, especially this tier, there is some drop off through it, but Chris Godwin's really the only one that I would have the toughest time making an argument between like him, Michael Gallup, Donovan Peoples-Jones, to start one of these guys ahead of him. So that is why I do have him as his own little sub tier here between Devonta Smith and Deebo Samuel, just a little bit more confidence in Chris. Now, Gabe Davis here, who I have at wide receiver 21 going up against the Jets. It's not a good matchup. However, I do have him 6 spots ahead of the ECR, and in part because of the wide receiver field this week, but also because these are the types of games where I think that Buffalo likes to try to stomp on their opponent's throats when they're a little bit concerned that they could lose. And so those are the types of games where Gabe Davis could go off. They'll take some shots at him to try and demoralize the opponent is what it is. So it's an upshot, and I like the fact of how I've noticed a pattern with how Buffalo plays against their opponents. It seems like the tougher opponents, they go for the gullet. So I'm hoping for that, and hoping that it connects. Then on to Adam Thielen, who I have ranked 23rd. The ECR name is 29, so I also have him 6 spots ahead of the ECR going up against Detroit, and they have been a tougher matchup for some time now, but I just kind of like Adam Thielen this week in a matchup where we do know that there's going to be some sort of back and forth. There should be, at least. You don't expect this to turn into some sort of defensive battle. In either case, I do expect them to rely on Adam Thielen a little bit. I expect him to have some decent opportunities, I guess, near the end zone this week. Now let's move on to wide receiver 24, Mike Evans, who I have 5 spots behind the ECR. The ECR has him at 19. I've been ranking them lower and lower each week for the last 3 weeks. It's worked for the last 2 weeks. One of these weeks, it would not work. But going up against San Francisco, have some concerns for that offense. And I think, if anything, it is going to be the quicker passing attack, Chris Godwin, and the running backs who are going to be able to feast the most this week. And I think Mike Evans will find it to be the hardest to get open and to have time for Tom Brady to make a deep pass for one of those Mike Evans big plays. So he'll need to have one of those touchdown games where he's got like 2 catches for 3 yards and 2 touchdowns. So now let's move on to Jerry Jeudy, who I have ranked 27th. I have him 5 spots ahead of the ECR at 32, going up against Kansas City. That's definitely part of the reason why I like him this week. It's a risky leg, and my projections are definitely going to have some say on shifting some of these guys around. But once again, expecting this bad offense to have plenty of opportunities to maybe make themselves look good for like one drive. I mean, we've seen Russell Wilson literally looks like the worst quarterback maybe outside of Kyle Allen this year. So, bad players do good in this league once a year. Maybe this will be the week where Russell Wilson looks like a competent quarterback for half of a game. That's all we need. And then Jerry Jeudy's in the gold. He did it last week on 4 targets, hoping for a little bit more this week going up against Kansas City. Once again, getting plenty of opportunities on the field. Then Brandon Ayuk, I have ranked 29th going up against Tampa Bay. Not a bad matchup, so I have him 6 spots behind the ECR, and why is that? He's been great this year. I've had him ranked well above Deebo for like 6-7 weeks now. I was ahead of the curve on that. Well, if Brock Purdy is the quarterback for them this week, which is the expectation, I think that he works better with a less traditional wide receiver, somebody like Deebo who moves around closer to the line of scrimmage. That's the kind of guy who seemed to work last week for Brock Purdy, and I expect that to continue to work. And that's definitely Shanahan-ian type of work. Brandon Ayuk's been the more traditional guy, and that's worked nicely with Jimmy Garoppolo, but I'm expecting Ayuk to maybe take a step back for the rest of the season, and Debo maybe to take a half step forward. So that is my feels on those guys. And then Jacoby Myers, I have ranked 34th. The ECR on him is 28th. Going up against Arizona, do like the matchup, do like the possibility. I'm just a little bit done with this guy. I've had him ranked higher than the ECR probably most weeks, and it just hasn't been working out very well. We'll see. My projections are definitely, I would think, gonna want to push him up more, but at least my projections might be a little bit more realistic on him. That he has been somebody that the projections have just loved, which has been part of the reason that I've pushed him up. So yeah, it's not the worst week for him, but there's some more guaranteed things that I would like to take. It's been a while since Jacoby has done anything, but he did sneak himself into this tier for that reason. Now let's move on to the next tier, which starts off at wide receiver 35 with George Pickens, followed by Tyler Boyd, Mac Hollins, DJ Shark Jr., Corey Davis, Nico Collins, Darius Slayton, Robert Woods, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, Rondale Moore, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Isaiah McKenzie, Van Jefferson, and Treylon Burks to wrap up that tier. And you're going to see quite a bit of highlighting there, just as with the running backs. There starts to be a lot of fluidity that we don't know what's going to happen. So from wide receiver 35 to 38, these are the guys who I see the most potential to be moving up in the rankings from here, the guys who I have some pretty darn solid hope for, despite the fact that, like for George Pickens, I am 5 spots behind the ECR. I've ranked 35th, the ECR on him is 30th, going up against Baltimore. It's not a great matchup. Yeah, there's just some concerns about George Pickens, but there's also some upside with him as of how he was ended up performing, but those underlying statistics did come true last week. I'm just expecting that offense to like get it all put together 1 week this season. Maybe this will be it. Possible. I'm just a little bit concerned on George Pickens. Then DJ Shark, I do have a lot of hope for, kind of the opposite end of that spectrum. I have him 5 spots ahead of the ECR. I'm ranked 38th. The ECR on him is 43, going up against Minnesota. Once again, do expect that to be a bit more of a back and forth type game, and I actually expect Detroit to upset Minnesota. I think that's very possible here. Detroit seems to have their things starting to go on offense, and that was including DJ Shark last week, had a really solid week, and I kind of expect that to continue, I guess. Then Darius Slayton, I have 7 spots behind the ECR. I've usually been the high guy on him, but I am not very hopeful for him to be having a good week this week. Philadelphia is really good at shutting down the number 1 wide receivers of other teams, and I don't think Darius Slayton is going to be able to overcome that. Then Robert Woods, I have 4 spots ahead of the ECR at 42nd. The ECR on him is 46th, going up against Jacksonville. Once again, really, really good matchup there against Jacksonville. I'd say once again, that was probably a different video that I said that in. So him and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, the thing is, their values are both reliant upon Treylon Burks, who's I think also down here in this tier at 48. Those guys are all very fluid, dependent on how the news comes out and ultimately what the end result is, who is playing. So those are guys who might be shifting around Sunday morning just prior to kickoff, but I do like one of them to have a top, 16, 17 week this week. Who is it going to be? And if Treylon Burks is healthy, my bet's on him. If not, my bet is kind of on Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. I'll see what my projections say. Then Rondale Moore, I'm not so hip to the hop about what his news is as far as his likelihood of playing, but he found himself being ranked by the experts. Maybe he played 2 weeks ago, and I just have brain farted on the fact that he came back there, but I think he was out then. He's probably very likely to play this week, in which case I have to evaluate all of my feelings on those wide receivers this week. I'm just a little bit concerned about them, though, so generally won't have him too high, but I do currently have him like 12 spots ahead of the ECR. But these guys are being ranked oddly because experts don't know what's going to end up happening in those situations. So I do like Rondale Moore a little bit in the fact that I do think one of those wide receivers between Marquise Brown, Rondale Moore, and DeAndre Hopkins will be having a good week. I just don't know which one it is. Then Marquez Valdes-Scantling, I have 5 spots behind the ECR. I'm ranked 45th. The ECR on him is 40th. Going up against Denver, it's not a great matchup. And just hasn't had too many good weeks. I'm going to bet on some other situations above that. Similar with Isaiah McKenzie, who I might end up putting up against Marquez Valdes-Scantling, but the tougher matchup just concerns me a little bit more, even though I do trust that offense a little bit more and think that the upside's a little bit better with Isaiah McKenzie over Valdez. Like, not the ceiling, just kind of the expected upside, we'll say, for Isaiah McKenzie's a little better. 5 spots behind the ECR going up against the Jets. I have him 46, the ECR and 41. There are guys who might have good games. That's why they make it into this tier. Just questions about the possibility of that actually coming to fruition. Then Van Jefferson, I have 3 spots behind the ECR. He is going to be reliant upon the quarterback there, I think is why I wanted to highlight him. It is a good matchup. So whether it's John Wolford or Baker Mayfield pass into him, in those instances, I'm a little bit more excited for him. Probably the most excited, I guess, for Baker Mayfield, for the possibility of Van Jefferson having a decent day in a good matchup. But if it is Bryson Perkins, then the value is almost nil. It's really tough to trust. I do think he had a touchdown with Bryson Perkins. Is that right? But whatever the case, makes him a lot tougher to trust. And then Treylon Burks, we talked about that situation. Now on to the next tier of wide receivers, Devin Duvernay, DeAndre Carter. Devin Duvernay ranked at 49th for me, DeAndre Carter at 50, followed by Marvin Jones Jr., Devontae Parker, Cortland Sutton, and Julio Jones to wrap up that tier at 54. And then that moves us into the proverbial trash tier here at wide receiver 55. I have Terrace Marshall Jr. Do have a little bit of hope for him. That's why I have him 5 spots ahead of the ECR at 60 going up against Seattle. There's just some upside to that game. It could be a high-ish scoring game, is always possible. Then at wide receiver 56, I have Elijah Moore, followed by Demarcus Robinson, Chris Moore, Mike Williams, Quez Watkins. So obviously Mike Williams, if he is playing this week, which I think is some pretty likely, and we'll want to listen to the news about what the coaches are saying about his usage and how optimistic they are that he'll have a full game of usage. But almost certainly, if Mike Williams is playing this week, he's making it right up into this first tier, actually, of mine. Right, probably around Devontae Smith and Amari Cooper, into that range between those 3 guys. He'd be a good option this week if he is playing. And then Elijah Moore going up against Buffalo. I have 9 spots behind the ECR. This is probably a little bit of a hangover from 2 weeks ago, so the rankings going into last week, I assume Corey Davis will overtake him in people's rankings who haven't really addressed that team yet, maybe in their rankings or something like that. Elijah Moore didn't do much, and 2 weeks ago he didn't do much either, but there was some hopium about that. So that is it for the wide receiver position. Once again, all positions have had videos already today, so you can check out my running back video just released a couple of hours ago. You could also check out my quarterbacks or my tight ends videos. They've all come out. And Saturday, I will have my start sit / bold takes column, where I also give you at least one option as far as a value pick for DFS, and just cover the news and notes and the injuries, as well as most recent news as of Friday evening, and that comes out Saturday morning. And then Sunday, come visit me live for my final rankings, or just check them out on the website all week. But I'll be here live 1 hour before kickoff. Peace out.